Hello and welcome to this first lesson in the series that I'll be doing based on the work by Thomas Egenes, the Introduction to Sanskrit. Before we start, I do urge you to take advantage of some of the other resources that are available online. There are some fantastic resources there which will help you if you study those in parallel to these lessons that I'm giving. The links to them, depending on how you have accessed this video that you're watching now, whether through the Buddhist Society in London or directly through my YouTube channel or any other method of access that there may be in the future, you should have been shown a page giving the various links. I'll just briefly share my screen showing what you will see, not necessarily in this format, but to give you an idea of the other resources that are available. I'm sharing my screen. There we are. One is 13 videos, you see I've selected here from the Academy of Indian Philosophy. This is a series on the pronunciation and the formation of the letters. It's done by an Indian. They are very easy to follow. It gives a detailed, minute explanation of pronunciation and the way that the various letters are formed. If you're serious about learning the Devanagari script, I strongly recommend that you use those videos as a backup to what I'm doing. I will be teaching you the entire Devanagari script during this course, but it's always helpful to see it put in a different way, by a different voice, in a different style. Equally, I have identified another course done by the Australian National University called The Joy of Sanskrit. I'm just highlighting that there. And in that course, they go through the Thomas Egenes lessons one by one. I think at the time of my making this video, they've got as far as lesson 25. I don't know whether they're continuing beyond that, but that's plenty to be getting on with. And again, there you'll see exactly the same material presented, but in a different voice, in a different style, in a different way. So just as we learned our own language, hearing numerous different voices around us in numerous different contexts. So I do urge you to get as much exposure as you can. These are two particular channels that I've identified, the Academy of Indian Philosophy and the ANU one. There are numerous resources available on the internet. I do encourage you just to explore and surf. You'll find so much useful material out there. And as time goes on, I will be building up this list of resources that I am identifying as being particularly useful for students. So that will expand as time goes on. So another point I want to emphasize is the relative cultural importance in Sanskrit, and to a large extent in Pali, though it's really crystallized in Sanskrit, the cultural importance of the spoken word rather than the script. Of course, Sanskrit is written down. There is the Devanagari script, which in fact is not that ancient. If you go back to Vedic times, the earliest form of what we now know as Sanskrit, documented from at least 3,000 years ago, it wasn't actually written down at all, and it always was an oral tradition. And among traditional Hindus in India, to this day, it's regarded primarily as an oral tradition rather than as a written one. Now, of course, nowadays, all of the available scriptures, all of the extant scriptures, I should say, are available mostly in Devanagari script, which is the script that has come to be used. though it wasn't always that script. There's nothing specially sacred about the script. I mean, for instance, until maybe even to this day, certainly when I was last there in the 1960s, down in Tamil Nadu, for example, books in Sanskrit were printed in the Tamil script, and on the other side, on the southwest, in Karnataka, books in Sanskrit were printed not in the Devanagari script, but in the Malayalam script. So the script itself is of secondary importance. Yes, learn it properly, you will need it, and studying here in the West, of course, will need it. But in this respect, it's the exact opposite of, for example, Chinese. Now, within the Chinese culture, the greatest importance was attached to the written word, to knowing the characters. And with the various forms of spoken Chinese that you have now all over China, it doesn't particularly matter how it's pronounced. Of course, you pronounce your own language, your own variety of the language. You pronounce it right in your own language. But a Mandarin speaker, a Hokkien speaker, a Cantonese speaker will all be pronouncing the old scriptures or the old Chinese in their own way. But what was centrally important in the culture was the written word and not how it was pronounced. That's the exact opposite of the Indian tradition, the Sanskrit tradition, where the central importance attaches to the written word and not to the script. Having said that, the script is important, whichever one we use, because it is an accurate, or is designed to be an accurate representation of the sound. The criterion in Sanskrit for whether the script is good or not is not whether you're using the Devanagari script or the Roman script or the Tamil script or the ancient Brahmi script. The criterion for a script being a good script is that it accurately represents every phoneme, that is, every separate sound of the language. It accurately represents it, not only accurately represents it, but each written symbol should have only one possible sound. So every sound has only one symbol, and every symbol means only one sound. So the criterion for a good script in the traditional Indian mind is something that accurately conveys the sounds of the language. So, for example, if we go back to our Chinese and Sanskrit comparison, if you are reading Chinese but in pinyin or in a romanized form, you aren't really reading Chinese. It's kind of cheating. You've transliterated it into Roman script. It's not really Chinese. Now, in complete contrast to that, if you are reading Sanskrit in the Roman script, you are genuinely reading Sanskrit, and any traditional Brahmin steeped in the Vedic and the Sanskrit tradition, he won't care what script you're reading it in. What he will concentrate in is, are you saying the sounds? And if he is considering the script, his criterion for judging that script is not whether it's one of the ancient Indian scripts or Devanagari. His criterion, as I say, will be whether that script accurately represents the sounds. So to the extent, which will be quite considerable, and some of you may never need to learn the Devanagari script at all, though for this course, of course, you will need to. But don't think you're cheating if you're reading Sanskrit in the Roman script. You aren't cheating. It's still the real stuff. We are, however, using the Devanagari script simply because the great majority of the textbooks and the textbooks that we'll be using, and some of the written materials, are written in the Devanagari script. In the Devanagari script, there are a few things to be learnt, but once you've learnt them, it's kind of fixed. Once you see a word written, there's only one way it can be pronounced, unlike in English, for example, where the way a word is spelt is a guide, but sometimes not much more than a guide to how it's pronounced. In Sanskrit, whichever script you're using, if it's correctly written, there is only one way it can be pronounced. So once you've learnt that script, the learning is, so to speak, out of the way for all time. You don't ever have to think, well, that's how this word is spelt. How is it pronounced? Well, you've already got that out of the way, because if you see it written correctly, there's only one possible way that any Sanskrit word can be pronounced. So to that extent, it's a great deal easier than, for example, a foreigner learning English, and all the different oddities of how our pronunciation departs from the way words are spelt in English. So I'll proceed now with the substance in lesson 1. Incidentally, in the resources sheet that you will all be having, there is a PDF, a publicly available online PDF of the book that I'll be using. I'm using the hard copy book here. It's in 2 volumes. It's fairly cheap. It's available on Amazon. But if you don't want to get the hard copy, as I say, there's a freely available copy online, and the link for that will be on the resources sheet for this course that you will all have. So starting on page 2, what I'll do, I'll read out what's there, and I will make little comments and asides as I go along. So in Sanskrit, each letter represents one and only one sound, which is called a varna. The original meaning of varna actually is color. So here we see they talk about a sound as a color. You have the distinct colors that you can recognize, and they've given that same word to the distinct sounds that you can recognize. So in English, the letter A may represent many sounds, but not so in Sanskrit. The alphabet is systematically arranged according to the structure of the mouth. There are 2 basic divisions to the alphabet. The vowels, that is the swara. Swara actually means sound or sounded, the R, the U, the O, and the consonants, which they call vyanjana, or manifesting. Vowels can be either short, hrasva, or long, dirgha. Now, I'll break off occasionally to give you little asides on these words. Hopefully you'll find them interesting. The word hrasva, I'll just write it out for you here. It means, sorry, I forgot to share my iPad with you. There we are, hrasva, which I will now, there we are, hrasva. Hrasva basically means short or little or minute. And you will, those of you who know the Metta Sutta in Pali, will recognize this in Dighavayeva Mahanta Majjhima Rasaka Anukatula, the Rasaka from Hrasva. It's that same word. Incidentally, the next word we see, Dirgha, which is long. Dirgha. We have that in Pali as well, and it's the same as in the Digha Nikaya, the long discourse of Dirgha in Sanskrit, Digha in Pali. So vowels can be either short, hrasva, or long, dirgha. Short vowels are held for 1 count, that's a matra, and long vowels are held for 2 counts. Some vowels are called simple, shuddha, and some are called complex, sanyukta. Now let's look at these 3 words, matra, shuddha, and sanyukta. By the way, whenever I stop on a word and discuss it, hopefully I will never be inviting you to learn a word or consider a word that's not going to be useful to you later on. Some I might pass over, but all of these ones, learn them now and they will be useful. And also, and I'm not going to apologize for doing it, very frequently I will be going into a bit of etymology. And one of the reasons I go into etymology is to demonstrate, and I'll be doing it more and more as we go along, that when we're learning Sanskrit, it's not just a random series of strange and foreign noises, that the language we're speaking now is a descendant of an earlier form of the language, of which Sanskrit and Vedic are much closer descendants, the ancient Indo-European, and back to the Proto, the most ancient form of Indo-European, from which Vedic and Sanskrit are descended, not at a great remove, and from which our modern English is also descended, but of course at a greater remove of a couple of thousand years. So look at this word matra then, in the light of what I've just said. Matra, and it means a measure. It's from the root ma, and in Greek, and I'll write it here, the long e, also that root measure, and the Greek word metron, which we have as meter, it's that same word. So our modern word a meter is directly related to the old Sanskrit matra, and they both mean a measure, from this root ma, in Greek me, meaning to measure. Some vowels are called simple shuddha. The word shuddha actually just means pure or clean, pure. Shuddha. Some of you may be familiar with the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, by Buddhaghosa. Vishuddhi means purification. Shuddha, pure. Shuddhi, purity. Vishuddhi, cleaning out, purification. So Vishuddhimarga in Sanskrit, Visuddhimagga in Pali, the path of purification. And some vowels are called simple, that's shuddha, literally clean, pure, and others are called complex, samyukta. Samyukta. Complex. That word samyukta, incidentally from the root yuj, verbal noun yoga, past participle yukta. Sorry, that didn't come out well. Yukta. So yoga we have. Our English word yoke, the yoking of the oxen, the binding together. Samyukta means con. Some is cognate with conjoined. So yukta, in Latin, jungere, junction. In our modern English, via French, joindre, we get joined. So samyukta, conjoined, are etymologically the same word. So I will just read these vowels out for you, and I repeat my emphasis on the usefulness of looking at the other resource that I mentioned, the Academy of Indian Philosophy resource. So I'll read short and long: a, I, u, r, and r. And the complex, that's the samyukta, is e, I, o, au. Now there's a paragraph here at the bottom of page 2 about a triple measured form, a triple measure syllable, which you get in Vedic but rarely in classical Sanskrit. I'll just go through it for the sake of completion, because in one matra, one measure is a short vowel and a short syllable. two matras, two measures, is a long vowel. Incidentally, talking about these measures and meter, when you talk about poetic meter, that means the poetic measure, long and short, stressed and unstressed. It's like a mathematical measuring of how a verse goes. You know, either light and heavy or short and long. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day, and so on. So meter is actually measurement. It is even a mathematical, arithmetical measurement of how long things are. So a short syllable is one matra, and a long syllable is two matras. And in this paragraph 4 at the bottom of page 2, it mentions in Vedic Sanskrit, rarely in classical Sanskrit, there are also vowels held for 3 counts called pluta, which are marked in Devanagari and Roman script by a short vowel followed by the numeral 3. If you're studying Vedic in due course, you'll need to know that in detail. For Sanskrit, you just don't need to know it. For practical purposes, it has effectively disappeared from Sanskrit. In fact, in all of my reading of Sanskrit, in Vedic, of course, it's common enough, but in all my reading of Sanskrit, I don't recall ever having come across this notation of a 3 matra syllable. Incidentally, just to a little aside, a pluta is from plu and cognate with float. So pluta, it's floating, you see, floating along, rather longer than the single matra or double matra, like floats for 3 matras. Now, on page 3, paragraph 5, says, here is the pronunciation of the vowels. Now, on page 3, paragraph 5, pronunciation of the vowels, the author here, the author has not done very much in the book, of which I thoroughly disapprove. Mostly it's a fantastically good book, but to say things like the Sanskrit A is pronounced like the English A in gate is just seriously misleading. And there are certain varieties of English where it will be pronounced quite similarly as an A sound, but just as like the English gate, particularly in southeastern English where you say A and O, so the O is like pronounced like the O in pole. Well, it's just not. So don't pay too much attention to this. It's like the vowels in heat and ghee and suit, and you like the U in suit. Well, not really. Ignore that, but don't let that put you off the rest of the book, which is actually pretty good. Down to paragraph 6, lines and dots called diacritics or diacritical marks. The reason we have those is because the Devanagari script has a separate symbol for every single sound. The Latin script does not have a separate symbol for every single sound. The word diacritic or diacritical comes from the Greek diakrinain, meaning to distinguish between one thing and another. So, for example, we have a dental t sound, which is written in Sanskrit like that, t. But we also have a t sound, t, t, and we put the diacritical mark, that is the distinguishing mark, as a dot under the T to distinguish the d from d. And the same, a number of them. There's an ordinary n, there's a ng, there's a ny, and there's a nr. So these diacritical marks are to distinguish between these letters, all of which have their distinct shapes in Devanagari script. So diacritics are not necessary in Devanagari because the letters as written are already sufficiently distinguished. It's only going into the Roman script that we need them. And so, for example, for the we put what's known as the macron, just meaning it's the Greek for big or long. So we put that sign to distinguish between a and a, whereas in Devanagari script, they are separate letters, similar but separate. That's a, and that's a with the extra stroke there. I'll write that for you, a and a. And similarly, E and E. So that's all it means by diacritics. And in the resources sheet, you will see that I have done, I think it's 2 separate videos on diacritics and the pronunciation. So I do encourage you to look at those videos as well. But no big deal if you don't, because you'll get used to it as we go along in this course. So paragraph 7 says a vowel by itself or a consonant or group of consonants followed by a vowel is called a syllable. Syllable, which in Sanskrit is akshara, which actually means irreducible, unbreakable, because they regard the syllables as the building blocks of the language. Not to be confused with roots. On the question of roots and stems, again, I urge you to look at the video that I've done called Roots and Stems, and the link to that will be available on the resources sheet, which you have or very soon will have to accompany this video. Now, over onto page 4, it mentions Sanskrit is written in the Devanagari script, and it's back in the time of the Buddha, for example, the Devanagari script was unknown. And at the time of King Ashoka, there was a form of the Brahmi script. The Devanagari script was not used then. It was a form of script that was developed later. For those of you who are interested in what the word actually means, some of you may know Deva means a god or an immortal. Nagara, note I'm writing it with a short a. Nagara means a city. Now the word for script is lipi, which is a feminine noun. Feminine noun. Now nagara is a neuter noun. Nagaram is a noun meaning city. You can make an adjective out of it, like from the Latin urbs, city, urban. We have urban meaning of the city. So an adjective meaning of the city, you can do that by, one way of doing it is by lengthening the first vowel. So nagara means urban, of the city. And the feminine form of that, to agree with lipi, is the nagari. Feminine form nagari lipi. The urban script, the city script. Now, we don't know actually whether there was a city called Devanagara, the god city, the city of the gods, but the script came to have the name, the Devanagari, the divine urban script, or the script of the city of the gods. Again, I think that there's not total clarity about how that name arose, but it's the name that has certainly stuck, and it's the word that we all use now. And number 9 mentions how to learn it. Well, of course, you all have your own individual learning styles. So let's now go to the first vowels in Devanagari. The way they're written in the Thomas Egenes book, the I, U, they're handwritten pretty much as they're written in print. The way that it's written in this book is how you will usually see it in print, but it's not the way it's usually handwritten. Handwriting is much easier. This is the way it's written in the Thomas Egenes book, like that. Fairly complex. Ah. In fact, in handwriting, it's very rare to see anyone writing it like that. It's much simpler in writing. It's written a bit like a 3. So you'll almost always see just like a 3, then linked to the upright and a little bit of a crossbar on top. That is You'll see it in print like that as well, but almost invariably that's how you'll see people handwriting it. So don't bother to learn, but you can learn if you want to, but don't fret about writing this complex form of the And the again, like that, a bit like a 3, then a joining link, then the upright, and then another upright. So the only thing that distinguishes the from the in writing is this upright bar, the additional upright bar on the right hand side. E and E, they will be pretty much the same in print and in handwriting. This is E, the crossbar, and the E is exactly the same letter, but with the hook on top. The E and E. And for the U and the U, it's the U and the U. Again, there's only one distinction, the U and the U, and that's the little drop hook for the U. Now, you will occasionally see people writing an U just like that, as if they're starting to write the and just with a line over the top. What then distinguishes it from the even though it's a similar thing that looks a bit like a 3, this is pure handwriting, by the way, just to write it like that, and the long U like that. What distinguishes it from the then is the upright. And for the they don't put a crossbar right across the top. That's wrong. For the the crossbar is truncated. There's a little bit of a crossbar at the top. More about crossbars later. It's quite important to understand those. These top horizontal lines. Quite important to understand those for the Devanagari script. And again, for the the crossbar will go across the 2 uprights, but it will leave a tiny little gap at the top of the letter. Whereas in the U, the crossbar will go right across the top. This is just handwriting. In printing, there's never any doubt which one it is. In printing, it's always perfectly clear. It's just in quick handwriting there may be a confusion. Another possible source of confusion is the H is often written like a 3 backwards. In full, it's written like that, but sometimes it'll be in quick writing, it'll be like that. So it could be confused from U if you aren't being careful. Anyway, don't bother to get all this into your heads yet. We'll be dealing with it in detail slowly as we go along. Right, we've now reached the end of page 4 of the printed book, so as to keep the length of the videos reasonably manageable. I'll stop this one now, and I'll resume with a separate video, which will be lesson 1B, where we will do the grammar and the exercises, which are at pages 5, 6, and 7 of the printed book.